Oh, yeah.
And we are live.
All
A
right.
political reactionary meets the red pill as Nick Fuentes joins Fresh and Fit. The manosphere meets populism as Andrew Tate joins Tucker Carlson. How did this happen? What's going on now? What comes next? Hey everyone, welcome to Civil Offense. My name is Ahmed Mlih, and today we're talking about the red pill, the manosphere, the reactionaries, the populists, and people who, in many instances, have absolutely no clue what they are doing. Not only that, I have let a furry back on my show.
Howdy.
I'm here with Eso, the Esoteric Entity, as he's okay with being called again, as he said on my last show. How are you doing, Eso?
I'm doing pretty well, although I'm 13 to 14 hours into a day that I only managed to get 6 hours of sleep, the night before. So pardon if my economy of language tonight's not very great.
We got Ignis in here, not in the actual live stream, but in the chat. He said gay. Response?
Well, that's not inaccurate. Be crime, do gay.
Okay. Well, we've also got the plumber known as Ancat. How are you doing, Ancat?
Yeah, no, I'm doing great. Not really much more to say. I mean, I got a good night's sleep, and I'm feeling pretty active, so I'll be up for a while.
I also got 6 hours of sleep, and I've been up since 7, so that's nice. Well, 7:30 actually. I'll be fair. So we're all good over here.
Yeah.
I called you the plumber, obviously, because you lay so much pipe, bro. I mean, it's obvious. Just check out the Discord server. Actually, we have a few announcements here. Make sure you go to ahmedmlih.com and sign up for my email list to get the latest updates. Actually, really, in reality, the Discord server actually has the latest updates, just like the election. The next one coming up in 2024 is the most important election of our lifetimes for real this time. So, just as important, make sure you go down in the description, check that out, and check out Civil Offense on Rumble. Yes, we are streaming live on there, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. I upload the podcast after we're done. And shout out to P Beaver, who donated on Rumble last time. I didn't shout you out because I did not see the Rumble chat. I guess they don't broadcast that on the StreamYard thing. But, nevertheless, thank you for that. Let's see what we got going on in chat. Artemis, this stream is sponsored by the Church of the Subgenius.
Praise Bob. Yes.
Okay, Bob. What's up, Jason? All right. So to get into today's topic,
I was going to say, on the topic of Church of the Subgenius, don't just eat your cheeseburger, eat the hell out of it.
So excited to boot. Oh yeah, exactly. I am as well. That's the first thing I'm going to do as soon as I can because I'm a proud citizen. So the polarization, of modern political discourse is our topic today, and we're talking about the right and how the narrative was basically that the left is going to the extreme, and conservatives would react to this and say, "Look at the radical left and what they're doing." But now we're kind of seeing that a bit inversed with what's going on today. So we kind of want to talk about that. First of all, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this, as a general statement, just kind of what you guys think about this, and also maybe figure out how political ideologies emerge in the first place.
Well, I just think it's funny how haven't we already seen this before with fucking Bush and the reactionaries against him during 9/11, and then we sort of saw it's always the crazy side who's completely unhinged, and then you have the sudden voice of reason to be thrust into power. And I think it's just kind of convenient that the names switch, but again the overarching theme of elections pretty much stay the same, no matter who you're talking about.
They changed the demographics slightly in terms of how they're presented aesthetically and give them a different name. But yeah, they're essentially in pretty much every state, there's more or less two demographics carved out by the state for every election cycle, or every time the people actually running the government changes, depending on the pretext that government operates around for how its political economy coordinates. And essentially how they're divided up is people that are essentially invested in the state and are invested in the property norms that are at present being defended by that particular state, and the controlled opposition demographic that's designed to signal to people that don't have any investment in, like, don't perceive themselves at least to have any investment in the state enforcing those property claims, because their relationship to the state is always just it controlling what they can and can't do from their perspective. They're not benefiting in any conceivable sense. Whereas in like the former case, mostly made up of people that are boomers at this point, but in previous generations would have been people that had college degrees, had houses, were the head of a household, and had to navigate through political institutions quite a bit just to maintain their lifestyle. Maybe benefited from welfare or benefited from some wage position that they've had for years that is essentially what's upholding their lifestyle at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think you framed it like before. I think because we've talked about this too. I think you've like framed it as sort of the like the dichotomy between the illusion and the disillusion. So like the boomer types who like currently benefit from the state's property norms. That's sort of one big demographic, and then the other demographic tends to be a bit younger generation, but like tends to be the people who are, you know, quote unquote disillusioned with quote unquote the system, but you know they have several avenues that can be led back to like politically safe conclusions.
Well, and that's fundamentally what is. Oh, can I be heard?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there is a fundamental difference between the current sort of socio-political climate and really any point that's existed, at least in U.S. history prior, though. And that difference is well, that difference is that the only people who have any sort of investment in what the state's doing at this point, because of the current circumstances that the political economy finds itself in, you know, a state of total collapse, and anything that would have been, you know, anything that would have been something that would give someone a reason to be invested in the political economy just doesn't exist anymore. There's no leverage that is actually, well, the leverage that's being exerted over people is increasingly flimsy because of new technique. And on top of that, more people are starting to just identify it as power being exerted over them because of the way that media distribution has changed. And people can actually coordinate in at least quasi-distributed networks within platforms like Discord. So it's narrative control it's still present. It's just narrative control takes place in the form of how content is curated to people through proprietary algorithms. And that's also incredibly convenient for the propagandists because it becomes increasingly difficult just by looking at an article alone to identify a narrative that's being crafted, because it's the algorithm that's crafting the narrative. And
so
sorry,
I actually wanted to point over to the left-right dichotomy, kind of how you were talking about that, you know, these two groups are often pinned against each other, whatever they really are, whatever they're really labeled. You know, and you kind of talk about how like this is sort of manufactured in the sense. So like I was kind of wondering what the evidence for like the left-right dichotomy being a creation of the state is, but I suppose you actually point to that with this.
Well, more so, what I would go on to note is that the difference ultimately doesn't the difference ultimately doesn't matter, because in what we established in like the last stream, politics is an end in function. It's really just a matter of what exactly, how exactly the state can message to people that happen to be either disillusioned or see themselves as being invested in the state at that particular moment to keep them invested. And that's the reason why, with the current demographic trends, There, things like UBI are being signaled to both the right and the left, or the increasingly like not being skeptical of the state, and there being a need for hierarchical centralized organization being just a bedrock of society that's unchallenged is something that is both endorsed by the demographics that describe themselves as leftists or rightists, despite what they claim to the contrary. Marxists, for example, endorsing On Authority by Engels and vanguardism, regardless of their pretext for doing so. That is essentially just the leftist equivalent of mold bug fans citing the concept of natural aristocracy.
So I actually have a tweet that talks a little bit about the whole, UBI thing. And so this is actually Chris Freeman, and he calls himself a libertarian. If you look at his Twitter bio, he calls himself that. But you see here, you have this meme right here where it says every socialist objection to capitalism, which is what he's defending. And UBI is basically that thing that makes it, now it's obviously necessary for capitalism to be a thing, because look at how it can be, protected from abusing workers and all that if we just give them UBI. And this is such an economically sound thing, right?
Yes, the original impetus for states creating welfare statism. Basically. Oh, sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, don't study the state, don't talk about ethics, only debate policy.
Right.
It's just that meme that I posted in the Discord where it's like the monarch king Leviathan controlling the two parroting puppets, basically, with the libertarian infighting headline.
But yeah, that is the original inception of the welfare state, as we understand it, which is as a way of keeping people that can't be wages enfranchised with the state's political economy. I mean, that should really show you how desperate that the state in function actually is, to the point where they're throwing their own intelligence agencies under the bus. Or they're literally just saying, hey, don't become a radical, we'll give you free money.
Ignis is claiming that you're talking at 0.75 speed. He's had a long day.
Yeah.
Come on. Okay, so I actually wanted to mention, kind of just bring up what the impact of this discourse will be societally. But before we kind of go into that, I actually wanted to also mention, because you talked about what we were addressing on our last show that we did. One thing is that you've talked about polis, the notion that political norms are informed by social organization, but you're saying libertarianism basically refutes this. And I actually thought that was a really interesting point. And when we're talking about neo-reactionaries, which I've actually been looking a lot into that myself, we could pretty much dismiss almost everything. Well, I mean, everything pretty much they say that's about politics by just looking at this and saying, okay, well, they say we have a misunderstanding of power, but they're literally the ones with the misunderstanding of power because they just accept the state's framework.
Or at the very least, they have a conception of power that internally they don't have any ability to justify, because of the fact that their claims about how it's expressed are just based on these a priori axioms that don't really reflect the way that people are actually acting. And if you're making claims about a concept which entails the nature of action, it's kind of important that you have a fleshed out methodology for what that even is.
Yeah, the popularization of the concept of polis, well, it's always existed as long as states have, but it sort of became popular among in ancient Greek, and the term polis originated from what they called basically it was the Greek term for city, or sorry, it was it meant city. And the term, and that's actually how the term politics, or what they called politic, emerged from. Basically, the combination of the word I'm trying to remember what the actual word for citizen was in Greek, but basically it was the combination between the word citizen and city, and what the word polis was when they meant city was essentially the combination of the actual like the town in ancient Greece, so like the buildings, like what we would commonly think of as a city, and the state. So they use the word polis interchangeably, and that's how you get the conflation between society and states.
Well, yeah,
The,
there's
the Greek
never,
the Greeks use that word to refer to them interchangeably.
and even before, well, it's not something that originated with Greece. Every state that has ever existed has had that as one component of its propaganda model, either the conflation of society in the state, or the state, or the characterization of the state as being the thing that defines a society's norms, because homogenous norms are just inherent to a society.
So Artemis says you misunderstand power. They say while never having read Foucault.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, there's
Did you
different
actually-
writers. There's different writers who've tried to articulate a theory of power. It's just his that's, I'd say, the most fleshed out of people that refer to their claims as theories of power directly.
Could you actually summarize Foucault's theory of power? Because I'm sure there are plenty of people that are watching this that don't know about that.
Well, I did in the previous stream, essentially, that as far as how norms develop in any particular societies, the defining characteristic of how those norms will be expressed in that particular group will be just dependent on power relations between the people in that particular society. So their ability to act, what technique is available to them, what resources are available, social dynamics created by this, and and so on.
All right. Any thoughts, Ancat?
I mean, think of it like as a web rather than he wanted to dispel sort of the like traditional notion that like power is this sort of top down thing. Like, oh, it's this one guy, which is traditionally how like libertarians tend to think of power relations, as so for Marxists it would be like the capitalist bourgeois owning the like proletarians, and for like a lot of libertarians it would be like the state dominating the subjects, which is true, which like Foucault didn't like deny, but he just thought that that analysis of power was lacking, and he thought it was lacking because it doesn't it essentially didn't, or like it was far too narrow for the actual like relations of power that exist in like everyone's daily lives. So if you think about like so like I guess a really good example of this would be like, think about I mean, to give like a really trivial example, like think about when you're at a party, for instance, and and you want to like play a song that you like, but but you know that if you play that song that you like, everyone in the crowd is going to laugh at you, or they're gonna think that you're a nerd or whatever. Like no one's holding a, like there isn't a property relation there. There isn't a gun, pressed right up against you, but in a sense you're not like, I mean, you're not like being directly coerced, but in a sense there is a power relation there between those individual groups of people and yourself.
No, Garen, I don't want to listen to Ice Spice.
Yeah, no, Foucault created this theory of power because because he was upset that people didn't want to listen to his trap bangers, but
his playlist. I think Ancat is speaking from personal experience. Are you?
No, actually,
They don't know
not
I have
really.
a great Ice Spice playlist.
I mean, that was an
like
example. That was an example Foucault gave, maybe from his perspective, but
let's see. All Artemis says, I was actually in that situation at a party where I wanted to play Blind Guardian.
Yeah, but it's a
anyway.
useful. Yeah, but it's a useful concept for libertarians to adapt, because traditionally we think that like we want to point to like a formal conspiracy, for instance, when we talk about like a really good example of this would be like teacher-student relationships. So let's say I think every libertarian here has probably had the experience where they're in their economics class, or they're in they're in one of their government and politics classes, and they just remember their teacher saying something completely like propagandistic and retarded. Well, a lot of libertarians tend to think, okay, well, they said this thing, so we need to point to like some formal conspiracy or some formal like decree by the government. Like where was the curriculum that forced the teacher to say all these things? When I think what a lot of people don't realize is that those relationships of propaganda can exist even though there's not an actual formal like decree marching order from the state at all. And it's because specifically like teachers saying these controversial and problematic things can emerge from other relationships. So for instance, like the teacher could say that thing that was really stupid because they heard it, because it wouldn't even need to be required on the on the school curriculum. They could have heard that repeated from when they were a kid, or they could have heard that repeated when they themselves saw something on the media, for instance, or they heard it from their family, they heard it from their friends. I mean, they themselves were also products of indoctrination. So I feel like it's problematic for a lot of libertarians to if they see that relationship between the teacher and the student, they need to point to a formal conspiracy, when all you need to do in order to point to why that relationship exists is Foucault's theory of power.
To understand how norms present in this particular society, what's causing them to be expressed the way that they are, and everything else is just a reflection of that.
Yeah, I actually want to break in here, and Ancat, I want to discuss kind of like, well, I'm not going to assume you're familiar, just off the bat, but do you know the advertising term earned media?
I'm not familiar, no.
So earned media is like when an advertiser makes, like, let's say M&M's has this billboard where there's like this giant M&M coming out of it, and then people start taking pictures of that and posting it on their social media. That's earned media, because they're not paying for the person to put it on their own social media, but the person's happening to do it anyway, and it's promoting M&M's. So basically with that, I'm kind of thinking here, like, this is almost the state's version of that. And I've actually seen, like, I mentioned you in one of my Discord servers because of this, where somebody was putting in like the, what is it, like 4Kids tune, whatever. I forgot what the channel name was, but like, it's like 4Kids, right? And they have them singing like the national anthem for 4th of July. Somebody posted that in my server. I don't remember exactly who it was, but basically I mentioned you saying this is like the state's earned media, because the state probably didn't pay for that. I mean, I'm assuming it didn't, but maybe, I don't know. But let's say it didn't, right? This is literally just like a set of animators and people and producers and whatever that put together this 4th of July message. But here it is, like, a bunch of characters singing, like, I don't know if it's the Pledge of Allegiance. I think it's the national anthem.
It was the national anthem.
Yeah, that's what it was. But point being, like, basically they're spreading patriotic messaging by doing that.
Yeah, you can be a parrot for propaganda, or like be subject to propaganda, like without seeing a single state mandated media, or be indoctrinated in a classroom, for instance.
Well, and
like think about power, that was just what I was going to say, is that like power relations like can and will like always exist even without the state. And that's, I think, what a lot of libertarians...
Let's read chat real quick. JC Armitage says, that sounds like somewhat like word of mouth. Yeah, basically, I mean, that's like how it spreads. Don't state education teachers have a specific curriculum they're required by state to teach throughout the school year? I mean, to that, I'd say, I mean, to Ancat's point, like, not every single thing is like state mandated that they're saying, yeah, there's plenty of stuff, but at the same time, there's stuff that they're saying that they just believe inherently.
Well, my point... Yeah, just real quick. Just my point is that you don't even need to point, like, you don't, like, yes, that is true. They do have curriculums, but like you don't need to point to that formal conspiracy, or that formal conspiracy that doesn't need to exist in order for those same propagandistic narratives that would mirror the exact curriculum. Like even if the state curriculum like didn't exist, I think that a lot of those same, like the same curriculum likely would still exist, just
Mm.
because the teachers crafting it quote unquote independently, um, would still be parroting those narratives. And I think it's really dangerous for a lot of libertarians to think that those can only exist through that curriculum, because they think, oh well, if the state isn't involved, if the state isn't decreeing an education, like a formal curriculum, then I guess it's not propaganda.
Right.
It's not government propaganda.
Well, yeah, and another problem is if you try to apply that reasoning consistently to just colloquial experiences that every person would have. Anybody who's a libertarian and is aware of politicization, if they have a friend or a family member, almost certainly you have a family member who is politicized still, is not a libertarian, doesn't really understand the nature of the state's propaganda model, so they just interpret it as a norm to navigate around. But yeah, almost certainly you've had some sort of conversation with them, and you've broached upon a subject that they perceive themselves having emotional investment in, because they see the state as something that defends it existing at all, because of that fundamental feature of polis being inherent to the state's narrative about itself, or simply just the fact that, like, challenging this, like, well, I kind of just stated that, but challenging the state at all because of the rules that gamify their understanding about the nature of societies, it causes them to become emotionally compromised because of how many things have a sort of a relationship to that concept within a narrative where this is the rule setting the narrative. But anyway, your family members will go into cognitive dissonance if you bring up certain lines of questioning. Your friends will. I mean, they're not government agents, and you don't want to follow that reasoning, because that schizophrenia follows naturally from there.
Did you see that Andrew Tate tweet where he tweeted out that little anime girl, and it was like, every woman's an agent of the state, like, don't trust her?
Yeah. Okay, CIA parents.
All right, but to get into the meat of the episode, because I did mention Andrew Tate, but first of all, I was going to start by talking about Nick Fuentes here, our favorite libertarian over here, and basically, it all started. It all started when he started. Yeah, it all started when he joined Kanye, Ye, for his 2024 campaign. Really, this is when it started being really mainstream, like when he got like mentioned on late night TV and all that. Nick Fuentes, I'm talking about, and it really brought. Well, we don't want to mention specific terms on here to get flagged or whatever, but the JQ, as it's called, if you don't know what that is, just look it up on Urban Dictionary. But it's brought back to mainstream discourse, and this was at the time. Something that I was also basically tying to the Buffalo shooter, because at the time, the white replacement was also this thing that was a topic of discussion, in which basically it's brought to mainstream discourse. And I was actually going to bring up a Michael Malice tweet where he talks about this to kind of get you guys' thoughts on this. This was like a little bit of an older one. This is from the time that it was happening, which was 2022, I believe. But here it is. So let me just put that on screen. Okay. So he says that the ongoing discussion about replacement theory, he means white replacement theory, marks a big and growing shift in political discourse. Namely, instead of the conversation being about hard left issues, defund the police, abortion at 9 months, trans kids, it's now the left reacting to ideas coming from the hard right.
I mean, I think the reaction dichotomy, I think that seems like it's going to continue at least until Biden gets kicked out of office. So I don't think I would really mark that as like a shift. I think it's more. I think, huh?
Kicked out, you say?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess voted in, you could say, or however you think elections work.
Nick Fuentes, Catboy enthusiast.
Yeah,
That's what
I
it is.
don't know how exactly the election cycle is going to play out, but like you can already see that Biden, like they're setting up this show where Biden's going to be ousted, and he's been set up as the most obvious fall guy that has ever existed in the history of politics. I mean, he's so far gone that there are several like instances of him at White House press corps events where he's asked questions even by the curated journalists that are allowed to go there, and he'll reply to their questions with things like, oh, they tell me I'm not supposed to answer that, or oh, that they say that I should skip that one. I
So do you
mean,
guys? I was gonna say, do you guys think like the idea of an Overton window, because we're talking about the whole thing where like the narrative is being shifted one way, and we're kind of talking about discourse here politically. Do you think the Overton window is kind of tied to this idea of polis, that like, oh, basically like because there's this Overton window in which the discussion is being had, that like, oh, this must affect politics, like, and by that I mean like policy.
well, that only really happens, that clash between the two demographics. It only really happens when the state is trying to distract people from something that would cause it doing something that would otherwise cause a lot of people to become disillusioned, or in this case, the entire system collapsing,
Okay.
them becoming aware of the fact that the entire system's collapsing around them. Um, but yeah, something that you noticed essentially from like the boomer generation up until like the early 2000s was there being like the underlying subtext in all of the narratives promoted in the state's propaganda model, because more people were invested in in the system that it's created with its political economy, that that both of them should be focusing on defending what's been established by the US government, and what they're presenting is defending is the best way to expand upon it.
I
And
see.
anybody that was against that, the Republican or Democrat Party in that case, was was marginalized. But that's changed because so many people are essentially in the position where they have absolutely nothing to lose, that the state's more concerned with control with the state is more concerned with engaging in constant psychological operations, so that they never actually question their internal rules through which they understand society, and therefore can't come to any conflicting conclusions other than the Socratic understanding of polis. And that's and not if any of you want to say something really quick
I
before I
think
go
this
on.
this got like, I don't see this in my actual YouTube chat, but DeLorean says that Biden's son attended celebrity orgies at a sex party club for the wealthy and famous.
Oh, and there's actual videos off of that were leaked off of his off of his computer of
Hmm.
like cheese pizza content,
Oh yeah,
like
yeah. Well, I don't know why I don't see
involving
that in my
him.
actual YouTube chat, but I guess it got flagged. Like I'm
Well,
able to pull it up in the actual stream thing, but on
Yeah,
YouTube
yeah.
it's not showing up.
Isn't it awful that for the first time in human history, a politician has basically allowed their friends and family and relatives to get away with almost anything.
Surprised he hasn't
I don't
been
know. It's
ousted already.
just so
I mean
awful that
Biden.
the Biden crime family, first
JC
time in
says
yeah.
history.
JC says surprised he hasn't been ousted already. Like in reference to Biden, maybe he's still useful to the state till the end of 2024. I mean, yeah, he probably wouldn't be in there if that wasn't the case.
So my theory is essentially that like I think that it's not really like a dichotomy between like two narratives. I think it's more just basically I think what's happening, and you're seeing this like within the last, I think basically since 2016, or 2015, since Trump got elected, that I think so many people and demographics are becoming disillusioned with the state and with the government that they're essentially like essentially pushing out
Pussing.
pushing, yeah, like pushing out almost as many of this as many anti-establishment narratives as they can.
Yeah.
So you saw, but basically, but just marketed towards, as we talked about before, like different demographics. So like we saw this most evidently like with the initial Trump campaign. um I think like especially in the aftermath of like the Iraq war, and like being disillusioned with quote unquote like both parties, with like Obama and Bush, continuing the same like Middle Eastern policies. And then of course like for a lot of the left wing, um like a lot of the like disillusioned people on the left, I think you sort of had this like Bernie Sanders figure, like opposing the establishment, Hillary or whatever. So you
Rookie
saw
Taylor.
both Bernie. Yeah, I mean, but like really, I mean, you saw like both Bernie and Trump like being sort of parroted, like
Well,
parroting basically the exact same narratives, but like, being pushed as anti-establishment. And now I think like now that it's 2023 and that like things have really just heightened so much and like people are so disillusioned, I think like at every turn you're seeing like every month or two you're seeing a brand new like
Yeah.
um anti-establishment figure. Like we've seen like five or six all get propped up simultaneously, like in this last year alone. Like we saw it with not only Trump like being kind of reframed as that anti-establishment figure, but also like RFK, and then also like Andrew Tate, and also like Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk, and like everyone basically.
Well,
Yeah.
and to clarify, if I were characterizing these as competing narratives, then I misspoke, because it would be more accurate to describe them as the same narrative being curated to different groups of people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Make
yeah,
sure to watch
it's
the
the
episode we
same.
did on that.
It's
We
the
actually
same
talked about
narrative.
the campaigns for 2024.
It's the same narrative because because all of them operate around the exact same rules for how people that have bought into them understand society's relationship to the state. And regardless of what ideological pretexts they have, they all conclude with the exact same thing, essentially.
And you brought this up with the whole, what was it? It wasn't student loans, it was the other thing, affirmative action. You put up a tweet in my server about somebody saying that like some lady, like his aunt or something, said that like, oh well, how are black people going to make it now that affirmative action isn't a thing? I'm for real.
I know that it is. It's just funny. I saw that too, and yeah, that's a pretty good example.
What do you mean you
of
saw it too? You were the one that posted
Yeah.
it.
Well,
Yeah,
You're
you
trying to
see,
shift
like-
it onto me. You're like,
like-
oh, you were the one that posted that.
I just didn't know if I was the one that posted it in your server. I
Yeah.
saw it, somebody else posted it in the back alley, and that's where
Okay.
I initially saw it. I don't use Twitter, but yeah,
Yeah, like
that's the
classic
most blatant example of recent politics. Or after the Supreme Court hearing ruled against Roe v. Wade, that legendary tweet from the white liberal woman who had a white liberal moment that I can't even repeat on stream, but I think you know which one I'm talking
Oh
about.
yeah, I remember. And yeah, you know what's like funny about that too is that like I was watching the this one video, and it was, I think I sent it to both of you guys, but it was like it was just called Leftist Twitter, like welcome to Leftist Twitter, and it was just a bunch of like reactionary takes from like Marxists and MLs and like Maoists and shit. And like there were quite a few that were literally like really hardcore like anti-Semitic and like and like really racist against black people, like who was lecturing the blacks, and I just thought it kind of goes back to like, yeah, no, like that was literally one of the things, and I just thought it was really funny how like reactionary politics on both the quote unquote left and right ultimately lead to the exact same conclusions. And you see this with the classic example of like Marx Leninism and fascism. But like you're also seeing this too with a lot of the reactionary like Hoppian like Ancat, like the more reactionary, Hoppians, where like the LP, for instance. I promoted this in like my other video, that my like short ANCAP Twitter video, but it was literally the LP doing the and this kind of blew up on Twitter, but the LP, going forward with genocide denial, when you see these exact same narratives being promoted by like literal tankies,
So
so
JC
it
says,
just
was
it
that
just
the
concludes.
white liberal femoid moment? Did she use the gamer word or something?
Close, like close.
No, I was the tweet of, I'm not going to actually say it, but
I
the
know you
tweet
can't.
yeah, the tweet referring to Clarence Thomas, doesn't the hard R in all caps know that they're coming for him next?
Oh,
Well, I mean, technically.
Okay, I swear I saw another tweet that was sort of similar and like called him like a house N-word. Because of his vote in Roe
He's not
v.
in the
Wade.
House, he's in the Supreme Court.
Wait, wouldn't I mean, even like, I don't know, wouldn't his vote be more symbolic towards being pro black people, considering the amount of black babies aborted every single year?
Well, the state's just trying to get more people to have babies because they're experiencing a version of the shrinking markets problem because of how many. Yes.
Look, if the state wants more babies, why aren't they mandating girlfriends?
Where's my mandated e-girl?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty prominent talking point that you're seeing in modern mainstream political narratives. And it's not necessarily unfounded either. Just the fact that there aren't as many people having kids. It's just nobody actually, of course, all of the specific talking heads that bring it up are studiously avoiding the obvious, which is the fact that the reason that this trend is emerging is because nobody wants to have kids when they can barely afford to feed themselves in the current political economy.
Wait, is this true? Is this true? Clarence Thomas is the token black guy on the Supreme Court. Most of them are Jewish? Hey, yo.
I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head, but
most of them are Jewish, huh? That's a little weird. It's a little sus.
What were you going to say?
No, I was just gonna say no, but like Eso, that can't be the reason why that's not the reason why the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. It's just because it's because Clarence Thomas was a house N-word. You just don't get it.
More than half are Jewish.
It's because he's a race traitor. That's why he ain't black.
The Fox is getting onto something here. I don't know.
But yeah, the reason that all of these political ideologies, it invariably just come to the same racist conclusion about different ethnicities, is because within political ideology, taken to its logical conclusion, everything has to be categorized within the context of demographics in order to understand, because that's what the Socratic concept of polis fundamentally implies. Is that there's just, well, if norms emerge because the state is representing people, then that means that there is an interest that represents everyone based on specific demographic characteristics. So something like fascism or intersectional politics is just like, it is just the final boss of this narrative. It's just the final version of it incarnated. You have to have messaging that's directed at black people because the blacks are a political demographic, and there's no way to have any conception of ethnicity that would characterize its relationship to society as such, which isn't going to invariably be extremely racist because it creates the impression of a zero-sum dynamic between people based on ethnicity.
Yeah, the same narrative you can look at like any ideology that's like prominent, whether that be like fascism, Marxism, like just I don't know, or even just demographic promoted um by the state or state media. Like three main things. Firstly, the state. The problem with the state isn't the state itself; it's a corrupting influence that's taking it over. Secondly, in order to have your interests met, you need to vote. You need to engage in politics. And thirdly, politics actually so the state simultaneously represents your interests and doesn't, because essentially in order for voting to emerge as being a valid means, that would need to imply that the state actually does represent your interests, because you can actually elect representatives, and ideology is one of the defining factors that causes the state to decree its policies. So yeah, basically the state's ideological, anything wrong with the state is a corrupting influence outside the state. And third, you need to vote.
So the Fox, or wait, that's the wrong one. The Fox says racism is a personal choice, even if it is distasteful. Who has the right to force others to think in any other way than they choose to?
Well, I'm not saying that anybody should be forced to think in any particular way. It's just that racism, because of what it implies about the nature of agency, contradicts libertarianism as a methodology and prevents one from being able to study the nature of society in a way that accurately reflects the nature of how it emerges.
Yeah, and I mean, you said this on the last.
I just think that I'm not racist. I just think that black people have inherently low time preferences.
I mean, and anyway, but the point being, on the last stream, you said like basically we don't win when everybody accepts the nap. We win when a cop shows up and everybody brings out a gun to get him away or do whatever. I'm not going to say that on here about cops, but point being, basically, like in a libertarian or stateless society, it's not about everybody accepting that racism is a foul thing and therefore that's how we achieve liberty. It's just that the state is gone and it can't reform.
It's just when you're studying the nature of society, you have to, it's good to understand that that's an abstraction, because if you don't, you start to, that it being a concept fundamentally implies that norms in behavior are established by something outside of agency, which runs into a whole bunch of issues with, understanding the way that certain social dynamics have a relationship with norms that characterize societies. Basically, it prevents you from looking at societies in any other way than one that's gamified inherently in a way where it assumes that something like polis is valid. Because if racism is if you're looking at the difference between ethnicities from a racist lens, where there's just behaviors that inherently gamify how people defined by their ethnicity act, and that's just based on some inherent characteristic of their ethnicity, then it means essentially that you can, like, that political demographics something approximating political demographics emerge organically out of societies. Now, and I'm not objecting,
real quick,
and I'm not objecting to that because of its implications. I mean, I have basis for objecting to it based on the nature of information and agency, which I kind of touched upon in the last stream in greater detail. But yeah, I'm just noting that from a libertarian perspective, there is reason to be skeptical of it.
Okay, real quick, a couple chats here. TLDL, identitarianism is an inevitability with the existence of a political class, regardless of how said political class brands itself. And then the Fox says, Apparently, the rollout of the digital dollar is being accelerated. Any comment on this?
I mean, yeah, it certainly is, but
Yeah.
I think that system is going to crash and burn before it even gets off the ground, because their plan seems to be trying to vertically integrate the already existing proprietary internet infrastructure into the new financial institutions that the state's trying to defend, so that, and that'll be the pressure for using this fiat currency as the new medium of exchange. The problem, though, is that pressure that's going to be like moving, that they assume will be there, that moves people into using this currency to begin with, is becoming increasingly unstable.
Okay, Ancat, it sounded like you had a thought real quick. I'm gonna pull up some tweets right after that, and we're gonna discuss them. But if you wanted to go ahead, you can.
I admit I completely lost my train of
Okay.
thought. If I
So
remember, I'll bring it back to
this
you.
wouldn't be a civil offense stream if we didn't bring up a Josh Equal tweet. So so basically, I'm just going to go into what he's talking about right now when it comes to this, and I kind of wanted to get his perspective. We'll see what he has to say. So basically, Nick Fuentes was on Fresh and Fit, which is a podcast within the manosphere, has millions of followers and listeners across the platforms, as according to this what this person says, and it's true. So basically, he has something about praising Hitler on their stream, and I did watch that, and it was funny, but well, whatever. That being the case, Josh Equal says, reject this effort to shift Nazism into the Overton window. Reject any person, group, or platform that's helping make this happen. And before we go on to our thoughts on this, I actually wanted to present another Josh Equal tweet that came out not too long ago when DeSantis was actually putting out it was his video during Pride Month, and it was that one video. I don't know, is it deleted now? Yeah, I don't even see it anymore. But anyway, to wrap up Pride Month,
was it that advertisement that
Yeah.
looked like it was made by a 14-year-old?
Yes, it was that one that had all those Wojaks and stuff, and had DeSantis as like the Sigma base guy. But anyway, so point being, Josh Equal actually tweeted out about this, saying the far right has officially moved on from "it's about protecting kids" to "it's a war on the LGBT community." And this actually, being in the place I am right now, I look at this and I say, Josh Equal, oh, I didn't even show this one on stream. Whoops. The far right officially moved on from "it's about protecting kids" to "it's a war on the LGBT community." There we go. I showed the tweet. But point being, there, it's like he's collectivizing this like far right as the movement itself. Like, oh, this is what the right is doing. It's kind of like, exactly the same thing where it's like, oh, look at the left. Look at what the left is doing. And Ancat, this is actually a point you bring up quite often to me, that you have been recently, at least, that people are grouping in like every single individual that probably shares some sort of views, like loosely even, and saying like, oh, this must be what this entire tribe of people believes, and kind of putting them in this dichotomy, like helping shove them into these two boxes, even though, obviously they're not like competing or anything, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's the role of political demographics. It's to create that impression, so then in response to that, people who find that objectionable, they just pathologize all of these people as being essentially just an interchangeable enemy that's working towards the same, getting the state to do the same thing.
Yeah, and it's also so like if you can you identify like other people as the enemy rather than the actual people who are monopolizing the core infrastructure or whatever, but and the property norms in that society. But primarily it's so when you hear like a media outpost say like the left is now demanding that you cut off your balls. So basically you can now like any family member, any friend, or any like person that you see calling themselves a quote unquote leftist, you can basically just project that own idea onto them and get angry at them, even though they might not even have that idea.
That's the most common form of subtext that is present in more modern propaganda, although it's been around really for the last couple of decades. Whenever this in that particular media presentation, whenever the state, something that the state's doing is being brought up, that's always how it's characterized, the subtext that's present there. The left's doing this. or this group is doing this, literally baked into the narrative, like the assumption characterizing the narrative. It's not even possible to characterize the state as anything other than a neutral influence that's being directed by some group in society that doesn't have any association to its necessary functions.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up that I saw, I rewatched it recently, actually. This was a stream that Dave Smith did with Nick Fuentes. Like, they had a debate on, quote unquote, what we wouldn't actually say is libertarianism, but Dave Smith says it is. But, basically they were kind of debating on what the best way to go about it is. And Dave Smith was, talking to Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is like, oh, I used to be a libertarian. I mean, more like a liberal. But he's like, oh, well, I realize like the state's actually a tool. Like, we need to look at the state not as, something that's just doing this. It's just because the people who are in it are bad. I mean, he's literally saying like, oh, I don't hate cops in general, but I just hate these cops right now, because of what they're doing to me right now. And they're giving me tickets while they're not controlling the black people in Chicago. And so basically speaking, like, it's kind of, he's still coming to this representation of the state as something that it's like, okay, well, it's just the actors within it. And then Dave Smith replies, oh, well, you're kind of right. It's just that we need to get rid of it because the actors that come within it are oftentimes bad people. So he kind of accepts his framework of this in doing so, and just kind of defeats his own argument, as far as any case for libertarianism when he starts talking like this.
Yeah, it's literally that comic of the like the Ancat, the Wojak in the Ancat shirt with the comment like, oh yeah, most libertarians graduate to right wing when they realize the state big government already exists and the state's just a tool before we gotta take control of it before the left uses it against us. And it's just that like blue-haired feminist leftist beating over the Ancat.
Yeah, Nunez moment.
And that's fundamentally the problem that that self-described libertarians have had with trying to make the case against the state, is they buy into the exact same assumptions made about the state as politicized people to a large extent, which leads them fundamentally in how they characterize societies to the exact same conclusion as politicized people.
It's actually what...
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, well, it's actually one of the early influences of Marxism in the libertarian movement, because the original explanation of the state was basically, the typical one that a lot of libertarians use, the like monopoly on violence arbitration definition, whereas Marxists actually shifted that definition, or Marx specifically, as the state. We define the state as basically the tool that the ruling class uses to uphold its relations. Basically, as it's a tool that the ruling class uses to perpetuate itself.
Yeah, so I wanted to read
which in Marxist theory is the actual like definition of a state. It's literally just a tool that we have to use first before the capitalists keep using it against us.
So the Fox says, I don't like the idea of compelled speech that comes from the trans identity / gender fluidity movement. People can fantasize all they want. Civil law shouldn't force compliance with fantasy.
Well, I mean,
that's actually...
There's a follow-up real quick if you want to see. LGBTQ plus can do what they want, but it is a sexual preference, and the age of 18 is the age of consent, given that all sexual preference propaganda should be restricted to 18 plus and child groomers scrutinized.
Well, I don't have any objection to the latter comment. I'm not even really going to touch the whole legal framework versus power relations discussion on that, because that's a whole discussion in and of itself. But as far as the initial point there, you're speaking in terms of what people should or shouldn't do. But the fundamental thing that you have to understand is what we've said about the nature of norms at the start of the stream, what's implied by, the concept of power as accurately described by Foucault, which is that whether or not these are claims that can actually be defended are an expression of the particular norms that are present in that society, which emerge as a result of the power relations that are present in that particular society. So if you want people to not be able to force compliance with speech codes, well, undermine political norms on how property are defended. It's that simple. Then it's not even possible.
Yeah, and I was just gonna respond to the Fox's comment too about the like sort of the whole trans things. That's also sort of been the narrative with like the pointing to these groups of people X, Y, and Z, because like I was watching this I can't remember where I read this, but it was some kind of like I think it was in a YouTube comment of like a trans person basically like working at this factory and with a bunch of their employees, and I think she like one of them because she's a teacher, I think, or I don't know, it's some kind of like student, so she could like teach children or whatever, and she was like invited over to someone's house by one of her employees to like go teach a lesson to one of her kids or whatever, and like be a tutor, and like the dude and one of like and both of the parents like basically told her like, if you touch my kid, you do anything, I'm not going to trust, I'm going to be watching you the whole time, I'm not going to trust you with my kid because I know what you people are up to or whatever. And it was just like this whole idea of like pointing to this one demographic, like trans the kids, and it creates this whole mentality where like you're not observing people on like this individual basis. You're just seeing, oh, they're a trans person, so I'm just going to assume that they have to be a child molester.
Well, and that's exactly the purpose of the modern expression of the political narrative. It's to try to get people to distrust each other so that they don't organize in ways that are subversive to the state, or so it's more difficult to do so.
Yeah, and to clarify too, like there's nothing like obviously objectionable about like being against and like promoting media against the whole like trans in the kids narrative, but like I feel like you got to be careful about your language in the sense that like you can't be blaming like fucking, you can't just say like very vague slogans like they're transing the kids. Well, who? Like what institutions? What specific people? Because because if you use like vague language like that, like people are gonna project their own meaning and idea and think that like, oh, this is the part of like of just trans people as a group, or because basically because most like trans people I'm pretty sure aren't cool with like drag queen story hour. Like a lot of them, they just like want to be left alone.
Well, and you see that sort of dynamic play out a lot as well, where there is propaganda, there's controlled op propaganda being promoted by one that is trying to characterize a subgroup of another demographic in a like as though they're hegemonically defined by a single set of behaviors outside of their agency. And then what the other political demographic turns around and says, "Hey, you're exactly right, because every single person that has this identity characteristic is represented by us."
Blue Shark says there is no such thing as civil law since there is no objective way to interpret legal framework. The only thing that exists is power dynamics.
Yeah, basically.
All right. So I did want to point out one more thing as far as right now, the left-right sort of like switch that we were discussing before, just to maybe show somewhat more of an example of it going on. This was also something that Michael Malice had tweeted out, I believe it was last year. He was saying one of the major cultural shifts in the last 5 years is the left. Oh, let me see if I can actually pull that up first. He said, let's see. Yeah. One of the major cultural shifts in the last 5 years is the left adopting the slang of the right. So this is, remember, son, it's not whether you win or lose. It's whether you call the other guy a snowflake before he calls you a snowflake. And that's some New Yorker comic. He points to Clinton saying that, I'm living rent free inside of Donald Trump's brain. And it's not a very nice place to be. I can tell you that. Apparently a New Hampshire voter in 2019 told Biden that, I'm assuming it's a guy. I have a very severe case of what's called Trump derangement syndrome. Maybe I should have assumed this is a woman, but basically, he's basically saying slang or TDS being used to mean Trump's driving me crazy. And then like the last example he updated it with in 2022, because I think this was a thread from like 2019. He brings it back to say a few months after Dark MAGA, today they're writing articles about Dark Brandon, which combines two slang terms from the right. So this trend is, as far as I know, historically unprecedented in American popular discourse and has many implications.
No, you have a severe case of political brainwashing.
Yeah, I mean, like, what are the severe implications of it? I mean, it doesn't really say much. I mean, he's a very big well, I'm saying Malice, like he's a very big advocate of national divorce, and he believes that the political discourse going on right now, like being polarized, is going to increase the odds of that. So I actually wanted to ask you guys what your thoughts on that specifically was.
He's like the closest like to the paleo movement that I've seen that is teetering on the edge of like being like could be post-political. I just think he needs to have like a conversation with I think if he honestly just had a conversation with like one of us, like I think he'd be a lot more accepting, because I can definitely tell like that he's a genuinely good-hearted guy, and like he's a smart guy for sure. He just has a few gray areas in his thinking, and I think he's definitely trending toward the I think he wants internally to like come to a post-political conclusion, but I think again because of like political propaganda, he's not really able to fully get there.
So I agree with you on that. And I mean, just to point this out, like he has basically like tweeted out things like, oh, well, if you're looking to the Republican Party to save you, you're wrong. But he also doesn't like the Libertarian Party. He's not really like a political party guy, but then he'll have like Republican figures on his show to discuss what their policy is and what they're going to do to, save America. And then, like basically he's talking about national divorce as his solution to things, but then at the same time, like he disses politicians so much on Twitter, not just as like people or individuals. He's like, these people of politicians are an issue. Like it's not just that we want new people in office or like whatever. He literally, there was this guy that tweeted like, I wish I could, well, based on what some governor in some state did, he wanted to hang the governor, right? And say like, I wish, like that guy would hang outside of the window of the new governor so that he could see what's going on. And Malice tweeted, it's like, my anarchist brain can't get how people think like this, to mean like, why would you put in a new governor afterward? So like Malice gets a lot of it. Like you see the anarchist handbook with Hoodie's putting in there what he quotes when he's talking about like anarchism. I saw a tweet from him where he said, like, what's the difference between left and right anarchism, quote unquote. Like he's like, I'm not really getting the difference. I don't know if it was Goldman or who on the left, like quote unquote left, compared to whoever the right one was, but it wasn't Hoppe or anything. It was like a genuine, like, I don't remember which anarchist, but like he seems to get it, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind though, like sometimes you'll see a lot of like seemingly quote unquote like anti-political takes, but you have to get trained to actually spot them. So for instance, really good examples, when anytime Marxists or like LP types like rail against cops or like post like a post like a video of them like giggling at like I don't know, like a cop getting shot or whatever, and then like being edgy, it's like keep in mind the actual subtext to what they're saying. Again, they're not actually being critical of like the police as an institution. They just want to be the ones taking the reins, essentially. Like with that tweet earlier of them, like the LP, tweeting about wanting to elect libertarian cops, for instance.
Basically.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were.
I was just gonna say, like, just really quick, like another good example. It is really easy to like miss, but like when you hear like libertarian types or like people like, I don't know, I'm trying to give a good example. Like someone from the LP or like Spike Cohen would be a really good example. Like of him saying, yeah, actually, the real problem is Democrats and Republicans are both colluding and working on the same side against your interests, and the real enemy is these politicians. Well, keep in mind again, like the internal subtext to that is that like politics is still a means that, you know, so yeah, they have these quote unquote same incentives, quote unquote, but really like it's subtext for wanting to elect like other politicians. And you've
Yeah,
also
Yeah,
seen this
and
a
with
bit,
Spike though,
like in and just like one more thing too, like you'll see this even in like Lenin's writing. Like I think Lenin's quote was like, yeah, it's really nice that you know, the origin of the basically the ultimate, you know, end of the state is basically you getting to choose which member of the ruling class will, you know, be in office every 4 or 5 years, right? But you always have to look at the subtext. You know, that itself is not an anti-political critique.
yeah. So I saw a tweet today. It was actually from Justice, and he was talking about how like
Well,
basically at the end of,
wait, Ahmed. I think Essa wanted to say something
yeah.
after
okay.
I was
What I
done.
was going to say is that it's actually really easy to spot political subtext, although it's not at all intuitive to how most people, like how it's presented to most people that they should approach understanding political discourse. Basically, you completely ignore the conclusion that they're claiming, like the political ideologue in question or the specific movement that they're claiming that they've reached. Focus only on the rules that they've established and how they're characterizing the concepts that they're referring to, and by implication see where those rules lead if you follow a narrative where you're characterizing concepts in this way. Like, what methodology would be implied by this, and where does that lead? And that's how you spot political propaganda.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was just going to mention with the Spike Cohen thing, like, because I mentioned the Justice tweet. I wasn't really going to pull it up or anything, but I was just saying that, like, I saw this from him and it sparked the memory of it. That he was saying that political forums are something that the government sets up, like, you know, like a town hall or whatever, like, you know, where they have like, or where they have the ability for people to testify, is basically just them setting up a safe space for you to be able to air out your griefs, or whatever it is, basically without actually making any sort of change. Like, they just put this there. Somebody replied to him saying that basically, like, oh, well, I mean, like, look at how like Spike Cohen wants to get a bunch of people in that room and actually show them, you know, what their threat is to the state. And I mean, I replied basically with what we mentioned on one of our other streams, where it's basically like, okay, well, if first of all, if your threat to them is just getting them out of office, well, I mean, you're kind of already just engaging with what the state wants you to do there, thinking that politics is legitimate. If not, if you actually make yourself seem like a credible threat, then you've exposed yourself to the state, and now they're going to target you. So, I mean, issue with that, obviously. I also wanted to mention with Michael Malice, like, because you were mentioning some people like kind of getting it, but not exactly. They want to be the ones that run the cops or whatever. Michael Malice, he actually he's like known for this quote. He's like, basically, there's no law so obscene that the police wouldn't enforce it, up to and including the mass execution of children, I believe was the end of it. But like, that was the quote he gave. And so like, he understands the problem with the institutions themselves. He's somebody that I think a lot more than your libertarian party shill or whatever, actually is a lot closer to the conclusions. And somebody actually mentioned here, Grambo said, a Malice conversation with people like Esso and Filthy would be history in the making. But that's me though, and I agree with that. We have a thing from Blue Shark saying means and ends consistency is important when looking at narratives people bring up.
Yeah, that's how
Exactly.
that's how Konkin characterized what I just described. But in essence, that's what means ends consistency is. It is understanding that the end that is reached is the emergent property of the means described. So completely ignore the end that somebody claims they reached and simply look at the means they lay out and what that implies.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, Esso, is that like, you know that like Konkin didn't like he didn't really come up with that term or like, you know, popularize it. That
Oh
was
yeah,
actually something that like was is just if you like look at like any like traditional like left anarchist scholar, that's one of like the foundational tenets of like traditional
yeah.
libertarianism.
I understand that Konkin didn't coin that term, but in specifically how he explained it in relation to the Austro-libertarian method, and specifically in Agorist class theory, how you would approach the state from that perspective, I would say that it's I would say that his invoking of it is most notable.
Yeah, I think he gave it definitely a new meaning, I think, or at least maybe a more enhanced meaning, like within the spirit of it, but like, wanting to really bake in that to, I think, libertarianism,
Yeah,
instead of it
disagree.
just being like a constitutive part.
But the
Yeah, so
point,
JC said town
sorry.
hall meeting is just another form of a suggestion box, but one that also paints a target on your back, much like protesting demonstrations. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Eso?
Well, I was ultimately just going to, remark about that point. No, don't ever do anything like make wood gasifiers and distribute them to people. Just shut up and vote.
Yeah.
I.e., beg the state to stop doing whatever it is that you don't want them to do. Because fundamentally, remember, when we're talking about political means, that's what all political means fundamentally entail.
All right.
Oh,
So
I'm not gonna vote. I'm gonna secede. Okay, well, how are you gonna secede? Oh, we'll have to elect secessionist candidates, Ancat mayors. Okay, well,
Ancat,
how are you gonna
look,
do that? Well, voting.
we're gonna have to secede from the Matrix. Okay, we have on here on our table right here the most Googled man at one point. Okay, that obviously he grew for whatever reason to prominence today. Andrew Tate. Okay, I'm sure you're the biggest fan, Ancat. I mean, you've sent me some Andrew Tate videos. I know you're a huge Tate bro, whatever they call him. But basically,
Dude, I'm like the Tate worshiper, dude. I'm like if he's the top G, I'm the bottom G.
there we go.
Whereas I've admittedly only watched I've only watched maybe a video or two of his. He's basically just yeah, he's basically just the 14-year-old basement dwellers philosopher. And I'm really kind of surprised that the state even went with him as like a propagandist in their particular
See,
in
now
their
we didn't even get
particular
into that.
propaganda model.
We haven't even gotten into this yet. What I was going to say about that was that this is like the whole manosphere thing is seen as a movement that grew because of a response to feminism being such a thing right now. But it seems like you would say maybe this is an inaccurate way of viewing it, since you're saying basically he is
Yeah.
just an agent of the state himself.
Well, it's framed as though it is a response to the feminist movement, but as a lot of people have already noted, and this is sort of what I've been trying to get to, I guess, for the entirety of the stream, is that propaganda. I keep referring to propaganda models. Well, I guess it's important to establish what propaganda actually is, because a lot of people think of propaganda as though it is just an information based or communication based concept. And the goal of a propaganda model is to get someone to be a proponent of a particular belief system. Well, that's not exactly accurate, because if you look at the conclusions that people who find themselves victims of propaganda models come to, even though if we were to try to characterize them as being ideological in nature, well, then you would have to explain how the propaganda model causes everyone to come to the exact same fundamentally the exact same understanding of the practical concerns that the ideology is a response to, when based on what I invoked in the last stream about information problems that were pointed out by Wittgenstein. That should be impossible, because um, one's internal narrative of any given concept is what even contextualizes what it means to them, because that's how they understand, how somebody understands the nature of a concept isn't necessarily connected to the meaning that they'll ascribe to it. So if everyone ascribes the exact same meaning to a particular concept or associates it with the same practical concern, it means that there's some sort of environmental pressure that's causing that, because you have to factor in something independent of their perception. And so what this kind of implies about propaganda is that it's a sociological phenomenon, essentially. And what I mean by that is it's in part information based, but there needs to be a very real pressure created in the environment that emerges organically out of how norms in that particular society are expressed, that make it so a particular narrative that's being furthered by a propaganda model effectively works as propaganda, because otherwise there isn't any coherent narrative created by just a single ideology or ideological slogans being promoted in mass. But even if people did internalize those slogans, they would all come to different conclusions about how it applies to their own lives, independent of those pressures gamifying how they see their own internally what motivates them to act.
You're getting some stuff from Ignis over here. He's saying, imagine respecting the person who imagines respecting the person who imagines respecting the person who imagines respecting. Damn. All right. Well, okay. I'm going to look at some chats real quick. Hold on. So people like Sneeko, Tate, and everything bad about the red-pilled manosphere and feminist activists are part of the control op movement. Thoughts?
Well, that's essentially the point that I was getting at. But the reason that I was explaining what a propaganda model is because when you understand when you understand what a propaganda model is, it's really easy to understand the appeal of someone like Andrew Tate. It's just, there's a bunch of it's essentially anybody who is male in the age demographic of 25 or under only really has like the political economy as it exists as a frame of reference for understanding the world that they're navigating through. So there's a real self-worth problem that a lot of people have. And Andrew Tate, being one of the propagandists that the state promotes, is a very obvious example of how propaganda is more like, as far as the information side of it, is curated towards demographics of people rather than something that's trying to like sell a belief system. Because the goal of propaganda is not the goal of propaganda fundamentally is to control the rules that someone uses to understand their perception of reality with, so that it's not possible to come to any conclusions, like essentially the conclusions that someone who's been propagandized come to organically aligns with the interests of the propagandist.
Yeah, and I was gonna point out, just with like Tate in general, I think this would actually be a really perfect basically, I think it would be a perfect example of the idea of propaganda and propaganda systems emerging without some sort of like state or government decree, like directly. Because I think what happened honestly with Tate, I don't think that he was like, like a literal like CIA agent or anything. I think honestly, him growing in popularity, I think that sort of emerged. I mean, it did, or like emerge on these proprietary platforms. But I think a lot of like the popularity and his like whole persona, I think a lot of that was just like sort of him, developing these ideas. And I think so. This idea of the Matrix, I think he developed sort of as his own tool to like, rope in disillusioned men. But I think the reason why it mirrors like every single other state narrative so perfectly, I think, is sort of what we talked about earlier, is because, Tate himself, I think, is also a product of government conditioning. So you can see a lot of popular figures that don't even have state connections that are developing these same like statist narratives. And so I think what happened is that like once Tate sort of started blowing up in the algorithm, I think that was the perfect opportunity for the state to realize, oh, actually, hey, this is actually a perfect guy that like we can start promoting too. And I think that's specifically how he got on Tucker Carlson's show. That was the moment when like, we know that now he's in cahoots with the state, whereas I think previously, that's I think their interests co-align, but I don't think Andrew Tate like blowing up in the algorithm is a really like a consequence of like the state promoting it or these like algorithms promoting it. I think it's just the consequence of a lot of like disillusioned young men, like Eso said, who are now finding this guy to be really appealing.
Well,
so you seem to know a lot about Andrew Tate blowing.
Well, what I was going to say.
I told you that in confidence.
Well, the reason what I was going to say is the reason why it's important to note that these algorithms are proprietary is because what that means is the weights that train them are fundamentally determined by the people that are running the particular site that is, that the algorithm is, working for. Twitter's algorithm is proprietary. Facebook's algorithm is proprietary. Reddit's, any site that essentially has a search function. And it is officially it's widely documented at this point in various, off the top, I could send you links after the stream's over. I don't have them on hand, but there's various sources that have already shown that intelligence agencies essentially do dictate the policy that Twitter in particular and Facebook use to curating the way that their algorithm feeds content to people. So it's not even controversial that the government does deliberately have these firms gamify proprietary algorithms so that they'll create essentially a propaganda model. Well, in the case of Twitter, it's more to do with just keeping people in a constant state of emotional compromise so that they're dehabituated out of critical thinking. But yeah, it is important to bring that up. It fundamentally has to make one call into question whether or not, if the state considered a figure like Andrew Tate to be subversive, whether or not they even could blow up in the algorithm, because this also implies that at any point, if a trend were to start emerging that these sites didn't approve of, they could simply train the weights of the algorithm differently so that it would stop recommending that to people.
Yeah, so real quick, the Fox said, I can relate to working out and having self-respect. For that, I agree with Tate. And I mean, me too. But the thing is, we're kind of analyzing, how this came to be in the first place. We're discussing social movements here. I mean, like, I agree with some of the things Tate says. I agree with, far more the manosphere on intersexual dynamics than I do feminism. I don't like feminism, but that's a personal view on social takes. This is more so just like analyzing, what's subversive to the state, what's not. Do I think Tate's subversive to the state? Honestly, no, because the Fox brings up, but I've never heard his views on the state. Tate has this idea of the Matrix, which we discussed even before the show, but now as well, where you could compare it to the deep state. But even then on Tucker Carlson, Tate, if anything, compared it to the New World Order pretty much in the way he talked about it, saying there's like, well, he didn't say New World Order specifically, but he pretty much laid out what the New World Order is and what a lot of people talk about in there being a global conspiracy against the masses. And I mean, he's pretty much, I do agree. We both agree feminism is cancer. But point being here that Tate also brings up like his dislike for the UK, for example. He's like, look at all these stabbings and crime that are happening. And even on Tucker Carlson, he's like, oh, well, they just keep trying to add laws to it to fix it. And it's like, okay, well, a libertarian may say, oh, well, he's actually getting it now. But at the same time, no, because like he talks about how great something like, well, I think like the UAE or Dubai is. I mean, look at what they do to punish crime. So maybe he'd say, oh, well, if only the UK would just institute that there, maybe then we'd be all right. Or maybe if they just enforce the law. And he's very like, I'm pretty sure he's pro-police just in the way he talks societally about what is normal and what isn't. And I mean, that's just probably a product of him being propagandized like everybody else. But he basically says like, oh, who comes at the end of the day to save you? A cop. Like he'll give that example as something. So in general, I mean, Tate's kind of like, you know, he's got these views where he's like, oh, I don't like these states, but he's statist still.
Yeah,
well, ultimately
remember, ignore the conclusion in a vacuum. Look at the means that were used to make the case for their reasoning and see where that in and of itself leads by implication, regardless of where they claimed that it led.
Yeah, ignore all of his policy prescriptions. Just focus on, again, the three things that I talked about earlier. If he's promoting the idea that, firstly, the state isn't the problem with the state isn't the state; it's an organization controlling it. That's his exact narrative with the Matrix.
And I mean, I would argue with like his policy
yeah.
prescriptions, he's also arguing that. That's why I brought them up.
Yeah. I just like. I was just assuming that you were talking about like, oh, well, he holds these policy prescriptions, which means that he isn't a libertarian. X,
well,
Y, and Z.
The reasoning behind even giving a policy prescription at all inherently assumes a political understanding of the nature of society's relationship to the state. As though policy is just something that the state in a vacuum can change overnight, and there aren't a whole bunch of, like we talked about in the last stream that we had, there aren't a bunch of necessary functions the state needs to carry out to sustain itself, which all presuppose that there's a bunch of organizations in place that would even make that possible.
Yeah, it assumes that discussing things in terms of policy assumes that the state is a representation of your interests, i.e. that through political means you can get the state to do what you want, even as quote-unquote unlikely as a lot of people make it out to be. Like the idea that that's possible is something that's inherently assumed when you're talking about like what policy should the state pursue. But it also assumes that like that again, like the state isn't actually ideological, is ideological. That it's just that it's just these ideological actors with these agendas to get elected.
I think there's actually something important to bring up with the Tucker Carlson interview itself, other than just what I've brought up already. Because in Tucker's introductory monologue, and these are pretty much just two quotes I'm going to bring up from there, one of the things he says when he's about to introduce Tater, I think it might be right after, he talks about what it's like, quote unquote, to be a boy becoming a man during the Biden years. So he specifically brings up, oh, look at how children are growing up during Joe Biden's presidency right now, like how they're not going to be able to become men because of the guy in office right now. And you can see, like, I mean, obviously, if you couldn't figure it out already, Tucker is as well, like just a literal agent of the state. But also, he said like earlier generations of Western leaders might have found part of Tate's message inspiring. And with that quote, I just want to say that, like basically he's coming up with the idea as well that, well, obviously, this is how society is organized. There are just these leaders that hear these political messages, and then that's how they decide to rule, and that's how they decide to lead. I mean, it's literally just, I mean, Tucker's bringing up Paulus as well as something that he accepts.
You're not going to hit puberty because Joe Biden's president.
He's got you on puberty blockers.
Well, the entire point of that show, like that interview, by the way, was basically just to be to be the introduction for boomers to see Tate, because again, they're not watching like the actual reasons why he's like controversial, or why he, all of his, shitty, like his persona on all these social media sites. And you'll notice this because he acts completely like he does basically a 180 personality shift in the interview.
And you'll notice also that he brought up,
it's nothing like the act.
This is important to that. This is important to that. He brings up that like the girls did TikTok videos, but he brings up nothing about the OnlyFans stuff.
Well, also, I think it's kind of funny how, like, again, it is just like a fluff piece for Tate. It's like so obvious that it is. Even giving, mostly it's just the stuff that he leaves out. Again, they're not talking. They're he's basically, the questions that he's asking him is So what's your message? And then he lies about his message, says that it's, just about helping men vaguely or whatever. He's obviously like, he's not going to challenge any of his takes on the, literally hitting women or whatever.
Okay,
But like,
you're missing something. You're missing something here. First of all, I'm not even gonna go over that. The other claim right there. I don't know everything about that, but you're ignoring when he got almost plowed through by the BBC. Okay. Did you not see his BBC interview? Okay.
I did, yeah.
There was a woman that came into his house and he was like, basically like, she kept asking questions that, and then when he answered like something that didn't have to do with what she was saying. Well, actually, I think it was like, I forgot what it even was at this point. I think she was asking like, why did you hit the women? And he's like, I never hit women. Like, if you look at this, there's not even a credible claim of you're talking about this fake woman. And then she's like, why'd you hit women? Like, it's something like that along those lines. And basically that's to say, oh, well, look, isn't the mainstream media, isn't the corporate press against him? Isn't that something that we should be looking at? And Tucker Carlson's this anti-establishment guy, that show he's coming on. Tucker's all different. He's not a part. He doesn't have any sort of contract with Fox News. He's just on Twitter,
Yeah, the being on the BBC is a product of the Matrix. But when I'm interviewed by
Have you ever
Tucker
thought about being on the
Carlson,
BBC?
I've thought about it a lot, believe it or not, being on quite a few. No, but yeah, it is kind of amazing that that's just that's sort of the narrative that he's been promoting. Plowed
Okay,
through BBC.
the Fox says microplastics and single-use plastic production proliferation, estrogen mimicking chemicals. No, I mean, yeah, like this was a discussion I had with Ancat the other day about the Industrial Revolution, like that meme where it's like the Industrial Revolution and then it's like there's plastic in my blood. Like literally, like we talked about how this manner in which the state is producing and the way in which, I mean, obviously all of this is happening is more so causing, these negative effects on people as opposed to if it were just done without this, so much statism. I mean, any statism really.
The way the Industrial Revolution emerged, because of the state's decreed property norms and artificial planning of the economy, and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race.
Yes.
Like a lot of people think that like, oh well, you're anti-industrial revolution, well you just want to return to monkey. Well, no, like the actual critique, or at least the libertarian one, is, well, specifically, I believe Eso part of the one Alul made. I want to let you get in on that because you could probably explain it better than I could.
Well, it's in the way that the state started defending political property norms. What happened is it made, and the way that the state controlled how credit was lended, it led to certain techniques in relation to certain studies being furthered and essentially being able to be dictated by the state, because certain techniques being furthered in how certain equipment could be designed, or how certain organization models were presumed to be present around certain equipment, or vice versa. This was all coordinated around what was possible to get investment for, and this is something that was planned by the state. And what ended up happening is, like, if you look at the first design of a steam engine that was actually used for the purposes of fueling a production model, like it would actually piss you off if you saw it. Like it's smaller. It's about the size of a modern toaster. There is in no way a large organizational production method implied by this tool existing, and yet you see what is essentially the exact same thing by the end of the century that it was developed, scaled upwards to the point where, in order to even legally build one, because of all of the components that were required to actually make the machine, that it was like the only machine that was possible to get funding for, or was possible to develop without the state harassing you for trying to build one. You needed an entire factory with an entire organization model planned around it in order to sustain it.
The state co-opting the norms that emerged following the Industrial Revolution has been a consequence for the human race.
That's a more accurate way of characterizing what happened. The state, the state trying to exclusively claim all land and defend land claims as by title has resulted in a situation where the state controlled who could access new resources directly by fiat, and therefore the state had leverage over every single component necessary in production processes, which meant that the state, even outside of just the state could control what even counts as productivity or what counts as efficiency, because the state could control what was even possible as far as the way that machines could be designed around their political economy. And that's what resulted in some of the more grim aspects of the Industrial Revolution, when really, if you look at the original designs of the early machines that, are considered to be associated with the start of the Industrial Revolution, there is absolutely no reason that people running independent shops couldn't have just used these to start streamlining their production processes, other than the fact that if people did start doing that, it would be subversive to the state.
Yeah, and Ted Kaczynski just read that and read Ellul's explanation of this in Technological Society, like the same way that Rothbard did, as just return to monkey. You want to return to monkey? We have to return to monkey. It's technology that's the problem inherently.
Well, it is called a Technological Society. What other conclusion could you reach?
Dude, his conclusion was that we live in a society and it's technological. That was what Kaczynski and Rothbard thought about the book.
Even though the very first section of the Technological Society is Ellul stating explicitly the difference between the difference between his characterization of what he calls technique and the concept of technology generally.
So the Fox says that picture you're using, Eso, is the demon sphere early enrichment. Didn't a lot of people die a few times from being irradiated by that?
Yeah, and that's why I love this picture, because because the fox there implies that it's about to get taken out of his hand, and that's the only thing stopping it from going critical.
JC says, did the design of those early machines go through the patent office and therefore got the inventor Nikola Tesla?
A lot of them did, but the steam engine was you can look at the original blueprints for it. I'm not sure if it was suppressed by the patent office. I know that there were original early models built, but yeah, when people think of the steam engine, they think of essentially they think of a giant 19th century Gilded Era factory, or they think of an entire room of a train dedicated to fueling one. Nope. In the first steam engine was seriously just a little device that was about the size of your average toaster today, could fit on a table, and was capable of powering entire production lines.
But now, if you build a car that runs on water, you'll get shot.
What were you gonna say, Ancat?
Sorry, hang on. I got you for a second. You guys can continue. I'll be listening.
But
Okay.
yeah, I mean,
So
there were models of car originally designed as far back as the late 18th century. They just were suppressed by the patent office.
Yeah. The Fox says Oppenheimer was working on that stuff early when when doing the Manhattan Project. And then I was about to say Epstein. Einstein was a fucking huckster who wasn't ashamed to label someone anti-Semite to steal their body of work and claim it was his.
I don't know anything. I don't know anything about that. I just think that it's absurd that during the Manhattan Project, they were, in order to try to prevent a reactor from going critical, they were upholding the lead shielding with a fucking screwdriver.
Why don't people say Einstein? You know, like Epstein. Why not Einstein? Why not Epstein?
I think it's different because I know SAU pronounce him Wittgenstein, but I think I've heard
German.
like Roderick Long and other people pronounce it like Wittgenstein. So I don't know what the correct pronunciation is, but I mean I don't think it like matters, but
It does now because of Epstein.
yeah, now it matters.
Okay.
Jeffrey
So
Epstein.
I wanted to actually, I thought this may tie into some of the stuff we were talking about before. But I
Oh
guess
yeah,
I
wait.
just saw
Okay,
it in
I
the-
remember. Sorry, just one more thing. I remember
Sure.
what I wanted to say. Someone should do like a shelved patent office iceberg. I would love to watch one of those. Just do some deep lore, like see what inventions have been invented that could have been invented later.
I've toyed with the idea myself, but I would need to do a lot more venturing into that particular area.
Yeah, but yeah.
Fox
Sorry,
says I went down the
interrupting. Go
rabbit
ahead.
hole. Yeah, I went down the rabbit hole on Einstein. He was brilliant, but he also worked in the patent office and was privy to information he could and did use to his material benefit. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he did. But now I wanted to bring up a different topic, and actually, I do know how I was going to tie it back in now. So thank you for giving me a moment to stall and think about that. So here we go. I'm about to put it up here on the stream because StreamYard does not like me doing this for some reason. Okay. Let's see. You see it? I don't know. It just says add to stream. Hold on. We're waiting.
Yeah, I'm seeing
okay,
it.
there we go. Italy erases the name of gay mothers from their children's birth certificates. You see it?
Yep.
I was reading off the headline here. Italy erases the name of gay mothers from their children's. Italy erases the name of gay mothers from their children's birth certificates in heartbreaking crackdown against same-sex parents and surrogacy led by its ultra-conservative Woman PM. More like PMS, am I right?
It reads
Yeah,
like
I was just about to make that joke.
Been studying
Yeah,
been studying North Korean propaganda quite prominently as of late, and it's really like not exactly in terms not in terms of the subjects being presented, but like the phrasing and how like practically every new phrase has to have some invoking of an ideologically loaded or politically loaded concept into it. It reads a lot like a North Korean propaganda website.
And you know, I was trying to find this article before. Italy erases the name of gay mothers. I looked up Italy lesbian mothers, and it was hard to not be suggested nefarious links. So, I mean, there's that for propaganda, right?
U.S. city of Berkeley explodes in holocaust of flame over the antics of homosexuals. North Korean propaganda headline.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, once you get really good at like deconstructing propaganda narratives, you should be able to peel like 7 or 8 layers of subtext, like from just like a headline or just a paragraph or two.
Yeah, that's why I brought
any
it
kind
up.
of media.
And what I actually wanted to take from this was because I've talked about this on the show before, and this was like back on when I actually myself accepted like, politicians are actually these ideological actors that come in the state and change things based on, when they're elected and all, I believe the NPC framework of it. But basically speaking, like, her views on immigration were something that was discussed when she was first elected, and basically, like, you know, Georgia Maloney, who's the PM in question, the woman PM, I should say, is basically the same one that's like supposedly, like, you know, the article says Prime Minister Georgia Maloney's coalition disapproves of LGBT plus couples raising their children together. So, you know, basically we're looking at this, and it's essentially this propaganda article that gets you to think, hey, like this is happening because people voted in this fascist leader. Yeah, but basically it's just the state's interest. I'm actually wondering now, like, what the reason for the state to do this would be.
Now that being gay is illegal, gay people have to go down to the cemeteries, dig up fresh bodies in order to make new gay people. I don't know.
Yeah, but like, I mean, like what? Like, it's trying to promote the culture war there or something? Like, you know, what's the reason behind this?
Probably it's all gay. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, Italy has its own series of problems, and one of them is a sort of like the U.S. has its own instance of a shrinking market problem in the labor market. It wouldn't surprise me if this trend starts following elsewhere, particularly in European or North American states, where like marriage starts being defined as something that only hetero couples could have, because only hetero couples could have children.
So wait, why is the state promoting increased birth rates again?
Because there aren't as many people having kids, which means in the future there aren't going to be as many laborers in the white market.
Why not just decrease restrictions on immigration? Like, why would it be that this prime minister is also somebody that's like touting these immigration restrictions, and supposedly that might be just what Italy wants now?
I mean, could be both. I mean, it depends, honestly. It could be like just cost. I mean,
well, it's also that when you're dealing with people that are migrating from other parts of the world, there's also like lending practices, and the way that the welfare state treats them is different as a demographic.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. Let's catch up on chats real quick. Let's see. So we got, oh boy, the tradcons are an eventful rise in Italy. So getting closer to like similar to like Hungary. Okay. We pretty much dispelled why that's not the case. I guess, you know, that, you know, I don't know. Anyway, Italian lesbian mothers. Yeah, you put that into a search bar and see what you find. I did. And I'll tell you what I found. It was, you know, they were making love.
It was great.
I didn't watch the links. Maybe you want some of those.
Google.
But, you know,
no.
Maybe that PM... Maybe that PM needs to see more of Tifa getting railed in the middle of political meetings.
No.
Tifa?
Now that being black is back to being illegal, we're gonna have to go down to the cemeteries, dig up fresh bodies in order to make new black people.
Do not bring up TND. Okay. 1.1 birth rate.
TND.
Is that?
Yeah, is that Italy or? I bet you fapped to it. I did not do that. Don't do that. You should, you know, for you saying saying feminism is cancer and that you know, people self-improvement's good, you should not be fapping to that if you are. Let's see. Not even replacement levels, and there is already an aging workforce problem. Okay, yeah. Not enough factory meat to go around.
Basically.
Okay. Yeah, I see. Okay. Well, we've caught up on chat. I actually wanted to ask about the culture war in general, because I mean, that's part of this issue, I'd assume. Well, I mean, at least that's what the state uses to say, like, it needs to do these certain things or take these certain actions, or say like, oh, look at this person taking these actions. Like, for instance, the Supreme Court would be an instance of this, where they're like overturning the whatever case, you know, Roe v. Wade to like restrict abortion. So therefore, like, oh, it's because they're conservative, right, that they're doing this. And look at the right, they're going to the extreme or whatever. We've been addressing this the whole entire time. But if anything, we've talked about how the state, you know, tries to make it seem like there's two opposing groups. So I mean, like, what would you define the culture war as, really?
Well, I'm on the side of I'm a part of the culture war on the side against culture. So, I mean, it's just, I mean, yeah,
As a
it's just retarded. It's
as
a
a
psyop.
as a concept with a normative foundation, I would be against characterizing that way. Doesn't even really make sense to say that you are or aren't against culture. It's just kind of something that emerges once norms are established. It's a
It
sociological phenomenon.
it has the same problems with like black people and race. You know, racial like eugenics. You know.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, it leads to a lot of the same issues when trying to characterize it as a foundation for norms and one that's politically determined. Because yeah, that leads to like a lot of the pushback that you see from politicized people, and their first go like the thing that keeps them invested that is this assumption that the reason that norms are being expressed the way they are is because culture exists in a vacuum, and that's the reason that's what's actually the basis for characterizing organization models as they emerge, or available technique. It's not it has nothing to do with access to resources or threats in their environment. No, it's just something that exists outside of agency or outside of the ability to act that somehow contextualizes it.
so I was wondering if you guys had some readings you could suggest on like sociology or anything that would probably go more into depth about polis from an angle that isn't just some statist narrative.
I don't know. Well, I have quite a few, but they're on my website, so
Plug
I
it.
can link that in the chat. Yeah.
Plug it now. Just say it.
Well, I
I'm just
didn't.
gonna link it.
Well, and to come to the conclusions that I did, I've already established. I don't know if on stream that I have, but in case I haven't, or in case I didn't in the last stream, I would say that the main three influences that I that have like steered me towards the conclusion that I came to, that actually directly framed their concepts at their claims as claims about the nature of concepts in the study of societies, would be Konkin's work on Agora's class theory, which is a collection of essays, but not exactly one central book. But the Agorist Primer, or Counter Economics from the Back Alleys to the Stars, would be some good places to find some of these essays. Jacques Ellul, specifically the concept of technique as demonstrated in the technological society, and power relations as described by Michel Foucault.
Okay. The Fox says socialism and economic and sociological analysis by Mises.
Well, honestly, if you want like the most sophisticated analysis of economies from like the Austrian perspective, I'd say that it's Lachmann. Ludwig Lachmann is probably where you'd want to look, because there's some interesting critiques that he presents that follow from the way that Austrians characterize action, that kind of pokes holes in a lot of things that are taken for granted in by other Austrians, like the assumption that general supply and demand can exist, for example.
All right.
Well, if value is subjective, how is that the case?
Ancat, you're gonna have to plug the site some other way because it doesn't show up in the chat when you post a link.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, links don't post in the YouTube chat. But I was gonna wonder. Well, I was gonna ask if you guys had any sort of closing thoughts for now, because we're getting on 2 hours. But it has been great. I do want to let me mention first that I do want to talk about neo-reactionary, the way it intersects, with this whole like libertarian paleo movement and all that more in the future. And I hope we can have some more discussions on that. I think it's actually a really interesting topic to talk about.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that it wasn't this stream, because I'm gonna need to be awake for that one.
Well, yeah, we got more into like the red pill and all that, like talking more about it. I actually thought we had some really like thought-provoking stuff today, which I really enjoy. But sure, Eso, if you had any closing thoughts other than that, you can go ahead.
Not necessarily, to be perfectly honest.
All right. How about you, Ancat?
Yeah, it kind of sucks that people can't access the library. Can they just highlight the link and then click it and then drag it into like a tab or whatever?
I'd say just name the website now, and then I can put it in the description later. Or
okay, well, it's just what I it's just called Into the Agora 01. It's like a Wix or whatever. But yeah, I think just linking it in the description might be better.
All right. Yeah.
Also, plug for Esso's work, because I think like
I was gonna give him time.
Huh?
I was gonna give him time to plug afterward.
No, I was just gonna say, like, as far as like expansions on like Elul and Agora's class theory, I think have come like from some of Esso's work. So I made a more concise document of that thing that you wrote back in 2021, the dialectic of the state, because you go into expanding upon like Agora's class theory or just Agora's work in general, and I think it's pretty important. So
yeah, there was, and I could write even more about it since. But that was, I'd still say that was a pretty good. I mean, I just established all of it on a single graph. But yeah, it goes more into detail and specifically why I characterize certain concepts as I do. So it would be a pretty decent read. But yeah, when I come back to making essays, I'm definitely going to be expanding on this quite a bit.
Yeah, so if you go to the website that Ahmed's gonna link, you'll see it in like the basics category, where I kind of you'll see it you'll see the like the one that you'll see that writing that Essa is referring to. It's pretty good, because I think it's a lot more like, I think I'd personally read that first, because I think that like establishes, I think, the most important heart of agorism fundamentally, that like I think you're not really gonna get out of reading Konkin, even though like definitely read Konkin for sure. But like,
anything else you want to play?
Like I think, well, go ahead, Essa.
I was just going to say that there is still a video that's almost done that's going to be on the Backalley pretty soon here. It's just I was planning on having it up by the end of June, but yeah, I mean, things didn't really work out as intended, and it's there's sort of a lot of factors at play, and some of them touch upon things that I don't really feel comfortable talking about on stream. But yeah, it's almost done, so it's not going to take too much longer.
I was going to give you time to plug. You're just too excited to shove that plug in, aren't you?
Well, you said you were going to give me time to plug.
Yeah.
I mean, if you get to know Esso,
he was going already on it.
If you get to know Esso, he's a big fan of shoving in plugs. So
yeah, well, the Fox says, I wish he would do more response videos to The View, because it is just a shit posting fest. Who will do more responses to The View? Did you respond to The View?
I think I made a video back in like 2017 when I was making like Ancat commentary content, and I would rather. Oh my god, I would rather shoot my hand against the wall with a nail gun than watch The View.
I'll go watch it for you.
Yeah, I'll admit I haven't watched it in a long time, but I know exactly what he's talking about. And yeah, it was, I think, like, yeah, 2018, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, he did a response to The Views. Man, I don't remember that, but yeah, I remember watching that. thought it was funny, but
I
And-
don't know why anybody, how anybody can sit there and watch content like that other than being so doped up on opioids they don't know what's going on.
yeah, or
Ancat, what was
Oprah,
your
like shows like Oprah or Ellen.
So the Fox liked it. He
Same
said it
way.
was top keck last time he did it. Ancat, you had your video essay that you were doing. If you wanted to talk a little bit more about the progress, and then anything else you wanted to plug, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so the progress on the video essay is basically I've realized that a lot of it has required me to go into a bit more research than I would have anticipated. So I've been looking into specifically for the parts of it. Oh yeah, I should probably mention what it is if no one knows at the moment. I'm writing a concise. It's basically a book at this point, but it's a concise video essay timeline of the history of the libertarian movement. And
How
that
long
includes.
is it?
Dude, it's insanely long. I mean, longer than you'd expect coming from me, but
Yeah.
no, but like essentially it's going to go into basically it's going to go into the history of left libertarianism, how libertarianism originated, the history of Marxism and the First International, socialism, communism, capitalism, a lot of these buzzwords that emerged. Basically it's going to be a concise timeline going up to the present day, and I want the video to serve firstly as an important, like, just an interesting piece of, information just for people who are sort of interested in it and want to learn more about that subject, but also I want to use it as a framing device. So because I think the problem right now in a lot of the libertarian spheres that I've been a part of, whether that be a lot of the ANCAP circles or a lot of the more lefty anarchists that I've been a part of, a lot of their disagreements mainly come down to semantics and not really understanding the full in-depth history of the scope of the movement specifically. And I think if they were to have this concise view, they'd be a lot less narrow-minded in their thinking of like rejecting certain ideas. And what I want to show is that the movement of libertarianism has been essentially a concise like evolvement from one to the other. So like a good example would be like a lot of like ancoms tend to think that like, oh well, anarcho-capitalism and like fucking Rothbard's work, that was just a totally detached thing. It was just this subversion by the Cato Institute. But actually, if you reduce your I'm against capitalism lenses, and you actually read some of his work, no, actually, despite his obvious flaws, I think he actually contributed quite a bit of work. And if you got rid of those, capitalist goggles that are preventing you from, basically from like throwing out important contributions to libertarianism, maybe you'd have a more expansive like understanding of the state. And so I want to basically I guess to sort of sum it up, I think that a lot of libertarians in the movement are sort of stuck in their own, I guess, community bubble, and they have a very narrow understanding of their own movement, and I want to expand that and give them a concise view so that any like content that they see or any like content that they view further, they're going to have like a lot of context for why things are currently the way they are.
Yeah, that summary is about as long as the essay.
It's gonna be a doozy, but and I'm also gonna be doing what also required me to have a lot of research too was delving into more like the more modern like YouTube sphere, like the libertarian YouTube sphere also, but I'll need to do more research into that as well. So it's gonna be like, yeah, so it's gonna be from like the late 1700s to today, basically.
All right. Well, anything else?
But yes, yeah. Sorry for the insanely long plug, by the way.
No, I'm looking forward to it, and I don't really have anything else to add other than the video that we're putting out could easily turn out as long as the Hoppe essay at this point. So.
All right. Well, I gave you both your time to speak your piece on what you got. Everybody, make sure to check them out. Backalley Philosophy and Into the Agora. They actually, Into the Agora has not made as much content, but they do both have good content on there. Well, Ancat Twitter is a good video, but there is soon to be good content as well on Into the Agora.
Yeah, if you subscribe and just click the notification bell, like you'll get content. So
now, make sure to also like this stream, comment, and click my bell so you can know when these guys are back on the stream. It has been good. It has been a great 2 hours. Honestly, enjoyed being with all of you guys. Thank you for everybody who showed up to the stream. Just remember again, ahmedmlih.com. Follow me at Civil Offense on all social media. Pretty much. I honestly, it's probably just Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. Prax James, hello. You're like so late, but thank you for showing up right at the end. Make sure you rewind that stream and watch the whole thing. Thank you so much. All right, guys, remember that civil offense is the key to winning. Thank you.